Once upon a time, a young student went to a Zen master seeking knowledge. The master poured tea into the student's cup, but he continued to pour even after the cup was full and tea spilled all over the table. The student finally exclaimed, "The cup is full, no more can be added." The Zen master stopped pouring and replied, "Like this cup, you are full of your own opinions and preconceptions. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" This story is often used to illustrate the idea that in order to truly learn and understand something new, one must first let go of their existing beliefs and be open to new ideas and perspectives. It emphasizes the importance of humility and a willingness to learn, as well as the need to let go of one's attachments and preconceptions in order to truly understand the world around us. The empty field. Once upon a time, a Zen master was asked by a student, "Master, what is the true nature of the world?" The master pointed to an empty field and replied, "This is it." The student, confused, asked, "But there's nothing there." The master replied, "Exactly." This story is often used to illustrate the idea that the true nature of the world is emptiness or suchness in Zen. It highlights the idea that the world is empty of inherent existence and that everything is constantly changing and interdependent. It also emphasizes that true understanding of the world comes from seeing things as they truly are, rather than imposing one's own preconceptions and interpretations on them. The two arrows. Once upon a time, a Zen master was teaching a group of students about the nature of suffering. He explained, "Imagine you are shot by two arrows. The first arrow is the pain and suffering that comes from external events, such as illness or loss. The second arrow is the suffering that comes from your own thoughts and reactions to the first arrow. It's the second arrow that causes the most suffering." The students asked, "Master, how can we avoid the second arrow?" The master replied, "The only way to avoid the second arrow is to become aware of it and to let go of your attachment to it. Learn to observe your thoughts and emotions without getting caught up in them. This is the path to true freedom and peace." This story is often used to illustrate the idea that suffering is not only caused by external events, but also by our own thoughts and reactions to them. It emphasizes the importance of becoming aware of your own thoughts and emotions, and learning to let go of attachment to them in order to alleviate suffering and find inner peace. The empty field. Once upon a time, a Zen master was asked by a student, "Master, what is the true nature of the world?" The master pointed to an empty field and replied, "This is it." The student, confused, asked, "But there's nothing there." The master replied, "Exactly." This story is often used to illustrate the idea that the true nature of the world is emptiness or suchness in Zen. It highlights the idea that the world is empty of inherent existence and that everything is constantly changing and interdependent. It also emphasizes that true understanding of the world comes from seeing things as they truly are, rather than imposing one's own preconceptions and interpretations on them. The sound of one hand clapping. A Zen master was once asked by a student, "Master, what is the sound of one hand clapping?" The master simply replied, "The sound of one hand clapping." The student was confused and asked again, "But master, what is the sound of one hand clapping?" The master repeated his answer, "The sound of one hand clapping." The student became frustrated and asked a third time, "Master, please tell me, what is the sound of one hand clapping?" The master finally looked at the student and said, "The sound of one hand clapping is the sound of the mind coming to a stop. When you can understand this, you will understand Zen." The meaning of this story is that Zen is about understanding the nature of reality. and that true understanding cannot be put into words or explained with logic. The sound of one hand clapping is a Zen koan, a type of riddle or puzzle that is used to help students break through their rational minds and see the world in a new way. The master is saying that the student needs to let go of his attachment to language and logic in order to truly understand Zen. The sound of one hand clapping is also a metaphor for the silence that comes when we stop thinking and the mind is at peace. In Zen Buddhism, the ultimate goal is to achieve enlightenment, or to see the world as it truly is, without the illusion of the self and the ego getting in the way. This story is meant to illustrate that the mind needs to come to a stop to fully understand Zen and the nature of reality. It is also a reminder that words are not enough to understand Zen, and one needs to look beyond them to grasp the true meaning. The empty vase. A Zen master was once visited by a wealthy collector who had acquired a beautiful vase. The collector was very proud of his acquisition and wanted to show it off to the master. He placed the vase on the master's altar and said, "Master, look at this vase. It is the most beautiful and valuable vase in my collection. What do you think of it?" The master looked at the vase for a moment and then picked it up and handed it to the collector. "It's a nice vase," he said, "but it's empty." The collector was taken aback by the master's response. He had expected the master to be impressed by the vase's beauty and value. He asked, "But master, what do you mean by empty?" The master replied, "The vase is beautiful, but it's just an object. It has no value beyond its material worth. It is empty of any true meaning or purpose. Your attachment will just bring you emptiness." The collector realized that the master was right. He had been so caught up in the vase's beauty and the value that he had missed its true emptiness. He thanked the master and left, determined to let go of his attachment to material possessions and to seek true meaning and purpose in his life. The meaning of this story is that the material possessions, no matter how beautiful or valuable, are ultimately empty and meaningless. The master is teaching that true happiness and fulfillment cannot be found in material wealth or possessions. The vase is a metaphor for the emptiness of material possessions, and the collector's attachment to it represents the futility of seeking happiness in material wealth. The master encourages the collector to let go of the attachment to material possessions and seek true meaning and purpose in life. The mustard seed. The story goes that a Zen master was approached by a woman who was in great distress. She told the master that her only child had died, and she could not bear the pain of her loss. The master listened patiently and then gave her a small mustard seed. He told her to go home and find someone who had never experienced the loss of a child and to return the seed to him. The woman went from house to house, but found that everyone she spoke to had experienced the loss of a child. She realized that her suffering was not unique and that many people have gone through the same pain. She returned to the master and gave him back the mustard seed, acknowledging that her suffering was small compared to the suffering of others. The moral of the story is that suffering is part of life and we are not alone in our pain. Recognizing that everyone experiences suffering in some form can help us find compassion for ourselves and others. It also helps us to be grateful for the small things in life and to put our own suffering into perspective. The empty field. The story goes that a farmer had a field that he had worked on for years. One day, a fire swept through the field and burned everything to the ground. The farmer was devastated and couldn't stop crying at the loss of his crops and livelihood. A Zen master who lived nearby saw the farmer and decided to pay him a visit. The Zen master asked the farmer, "Is this field empty now?" The farmer nodded, still crying. The Zen master then asked, "But is it truly empty? Are there not opportunities for new growth and new beginnings in this empty field?" The farmer stopped crying and looked up at the master. He realized that the Zen master was right and that the empty field presented a new opportunity for him to start over and plant crops. He thanked the Zen master for his wise words and began to plan for the future. The moral of the story is that suffering and loss can be overwhelming, but it's important to find a new perspective and see opportunities for growth and renewal. It is not the end, but a new beginning. The uninvited guest. The story goes that a Zen master was hosting a large gathering of students and guests at his temple. One day, an uninvited guest arrived, and the master welcomed him with open arms. The guest, however, was rude and disruptive, causing a disturbance throughout the gathering. The other guests were upset and asked the master why he had allowed such a person to stay. The master replied, "The uninvited guest is like our own suffering. It arrives uninvited and can cause discomfort and disturbance. But if we turn it away or try to ignore it, it will only cause more trouble. Instead, we must welcome it and learn to live with it, just as we would any guest." The moral of the story is that suffering is an inevitable part of life, and it will come to us uninvited. Rather than trying to ignore it or avoid it, we should learn to accept and make peace with it. In doing so, we can find ways to coexist with our suffering and not let it consume us. Is that so? The Zen master Hakuin was praised by his neighbours as one living a pure life. A beautiful Japanese girl whose parents owned a food store lived near him. Suddenly, without any warning, her parents discovered she was with a child. This made her parents very angry. She would not confess to who the man was, but after much harassment, at last named Hakuin. In great anger, the parents went to the master. "Is that so?" was all he would say. After the child was born, it was brought to Hakuin. By this time, he had lost his reputation, which did not trouble him, but he took very good care of the child. He obtained milk from his neighbours and everything else the little one needed. A year later, the girl mother could stand it no longer. She told her parents the truth, that the real father of the child was a young man who worked in the fish market. The mother and father of the girl at once went to Hakuin to ask his forgiveness, to apologise at length, and to get the child back again. Hakuin was willing. In yielding the child, all he said was, "Is that so?" Obedience. The Master Bankei's talks were attended not only by Zen students, but by persons of all ranks and sects. He never quoted sutras nor indulged in scholastic dissertations. Instead, his words were spoken directly from his heart to the heart of his listeners. His large audiences angered a priest of the Nichiren sect because the adherents had left to hear about Zen. A self-centered Nichiren priest came to the temple, determined to debate with Bankei. "Hey Zen teacher," he called out, "wait a minute. Whoever respects you will obey what you say, but a man like myself does not respect you. Can you make me obey you?" "Come up beside me and I will show you," said Bankei. Proudly, the priest pushed his way through the crowd to the teacher. Bankei smiled. "Come over to my left side." The priest obeyed. "No," said Bankei. "We may talk better if you're on the right side. Step over here." The priest proudly stepped over to the right. "You see," observed Bankei, "you are obeying me, and I think you're a very gentle person. Now sit down and listen." Great waves. In the early days of the Meiji era, there lived a well-known wrestler called Onami. Great waves. Onami was immensely strong and knew the art of wrestling. In his private bouts, he defeated even his teacher, but in public was so bashful that his own pupils threw him. Onami felt he should go to a Zen master for help. Akuju, a wandering teacher, was stopping in a little temple nearby, so Onami went to see him and told him of his great trouble. "Great Waves is your name," the teacher advised, "so stay in this temple tonight. Imagine that you are those billows. You are no longer a wrestler who is afraid. You are those huge waves sweeping everything before them, swallowing all in their path. Do this, and you will be the greatest wrestler in the land." The teacher retired. Onami sat in meditation, trying to imagine himself as waves. He thought of many different things. Then gradually he turned more and more to the feeling of waves. As the night advanced, the waves became larger and larger. They swept away the flowers in their vases. Even the Buddha in the shrine was inundated. Before dawn, the temple was nothing but ebb and flow of an immense sea. In the morning, the teacher found Onami meditating, a faint smile on his face. He patted the wrestler's shoulder. "Now nothing can disturb you," he said. "You are those waves. You will sweep everything before you." The same day, Onami entered the wrestling contest and won. After that, no one in Japan was able to defeat him.